This is the Lydia and Spin with Lydia Lunch and Timothy Seymour Dahl, our first escapade of the new year. Hello, Tim.
Yes, it is. Hello.
How you feeling?
I'm feeling fine. I mean, I had like a classic working musician New Year's Eve gig playing upright bass background jazz. But it was cool. I don't mind doing that. And
Hey,
it was
gotta
it
pay the
was
rent.
early. Yeah, exactly. It was early. It was 6:30 to
Well,
9:30. So I was
uh,
out of there before all the losers decided to congregate and cheer
yeah,
the countdown.
I don't like these proposed holidays, but I have had my share of fun-filled frolics, and I am gonna be lazy the rest of the day after we get
Well,
this done.
as you should. You deserve it.
I do deserve it and I enjoy it and I promote it. So anyway, as I reported earlier, my internet is going in and out, and I found this article. Now I don't know if this is the problem, and one or two episodes ago I had said something also like this, but here comes another major solar storm as it's a
Ooh.
warning that Earth is facing another direct plasma hit with possible radio and GPS chaos. So I mean, the sun is just, as it always does anyway, is exploding. And the European Space Agency said that they've observed a very bright and fast coronal mass ejection billowing away from the sun and coming in this direction. So,
Ooh.
I mean, this could cause, they're surmising that it will cause a R1 level radio blackout risk to rise up from 35% this week, and then a S1 level radiation storm risk at 5% for the next 3 days. Now, we get that with the bomb cyclone that's about to hit the
Ooh.
drought soaked West Coast. Did you see the news with this bomb cyclone of rain that stretches all the way from the West Coast to Hawaii?
Yeah, because
Gigantic.
isn't it like I always forget them, like El Nino. There's like a couple of these things. I think it's one of those years where the
Yeah.
Pacific is kind of going a little nuts.
I mean,
Um,
this is going to be major damage. I mean, last weekend was the New Year's Eve weekend was bad enough in San Francisco, but this is going to be
I mean,
pretty devastating. And more tornadoes in Louisiana today as well. Where have been so
pretty
we've
late in the season or pretty middle of the winter. Tornadoes are always a
well,
little.
and today 60 degrees in New York,
Yeah, I mean, it's
first
pretty
week of
insane.
January.
And
Kind of nuts.
I love California so much, but geez, they
Yeah,
between the earthquakes, the fires, the floods, it's
the
like,
droughts,
oh
the
man.
locust, the lunatics. Anyway, we've been very lucky as
Wait,
where we sit here.
today it was like, it's 60s on 61, 62 with like a little overcast. It just and a little drizzle here and there. It feels like April. It literally feels.
It was very nuclear because it was like gray but bright. It was very quiet. The humidity was 75%, which is like a damper on everything.
Totally.
That's what it
I mean,
is. That's where we are. That's what
that's
it
where we
is.
are. Well,
We've been
what?
very lucky.
Sure, we have. I mean, on this planet, I mean, God, it's like we'll see how much longer we'll be lucky. I mean, we're consuming 175% what we can consume based on our population, and then the more consumer, the more people are moving up in quote unquote class. We're basically going to need 5 planets in the next 30 years. So it's I don't know.
Well, that's why I like to party like it's 2099 because I won't be alive then. All I'm saying.
There you go. One way I kind of entered the new year. I went on a little hike way down in South Brooklyn Marine Park. They have these marshes, and there's wildlife and
See any cranes?
I think I did actually. There's also some osprey, and there's all types of stuff going on. But then there's one thing I didn't anticipate. In the path, suddenly an NYPD SUV cop car is like with a hiking path, like kind of squeezing between the bushes. And I'm like, well, what's up with this? And they're basically like, have you seen a guy that looks like this? And I'm
Oh
like,
no!
no. It's
Oh
like,
no!
well, he's hanging around here with a gun. he just basically robbed some people, and I was like, well, I hope I don't see him. And they're like,
Well,
I hope you
it
don't
reminds
either.
me of my first story. So, a man in Kalamazoo, Michigan, was arrested after he was found drinking in a state hunting area while quote unquote listening to owls. So after being approached by the COs, the conservation officers, the drunk man defecated on his own Chrysler PT Cruiser and later told nurses that his blood was all beer, reported Mr.
God,
Y.
that guy's got a sense of humor.
Now, according to the report, the man had parked at Gordneck State Game Area, and he informed the conservation officers that he wanted to be left alone. He was there to listen to owls. However, an open tall boy can of natural ice was seen in his car's cup holder.
Now we're talking.
When asked on a scale of 1 to 10 how drunk he was, he said, I'm at a 5. I'll be honest, I'm drunk.
Yeah.
So anyway, he was arrested and they took him to the hospital. And when he got there, the man said, I'm the drunk one here. I'll give you directions how to get to the jail. Take me to the jail, you morons. So after drawing blood,
sounds like some friends of mine.
Yeah, the man told the nurses that his blood was all beer. And he said, I'm not going to lie to you. Pure, natural ice. Anyway,
Natty Light is kind of like, that's like a Bush Light. It's kind of smooth. Natural ice. You're starting to head into like malt liquor territory.
Oh, it's the lowest of the low. And it sounded to me like a story out of Florida, which is my next story, because always Florida is just the state of much maniacal mystery. So Orlando, 2 alleged bumbling burglars were arrested in Polk County over this weekend after one suspect dialed 911 intending to ask for help moving stolen goods and also a ride to Orlando International Airport. So deputies initially responded to a burglary call at a Dollar General at 1 a.m. where multiple items were stolen. And deputies reviewed Dollar General's video surveillance. You can't get away with anything these days. And they recognized one of the suspects, who they identified as Martin Gonzalez Garcia. What a name. And they searched the area but couldn't locate him. So later that same day, they received an emergency call from a private resident, but nobody answered. So the deputies went to check it out, a welfare check, and realized that the house was empty. However, they found Gonzalez Garcia and Gonzalez Garcia's girlfriend there, neither of whom had ties to the house.
That's bold. That's bold.
So the girlfriend called 911 for the purpose of having law enforcement assist her and Gonzalez Garcia with moving their belongings from the house, the one they were burglarizing, and they were trying to get a ride to the airport because they wanted to go to New York for the weekend. Deputies did help them with their belongings and did give them a ride, but it wasn't to the airport. It was to the Polk Pokey. Yeah, and that's where they stayed all weekend. Okay, and so Gonzalez Garcia stated, well, I knew what I did was wrong, but I needed the money. So when I knew that the resident was not mine, but I didn't have permission to get in, but I had to get in out of the cold. Because Central Florida that weekend was pretty...
Yeah, they weren't used to that.
Pretty chilly.
They weren't used to that. Well, I mean, Orlando, there was that New Year's Eve, like this, Orlando's got all these theme parks and it's got all this crap for people who are into that to do. There was this massive Ferris wheel, like a 400-foot Ferris wheel, and they were kind of like selling tickets, like, ring in the new year with your partner and kiss them this Ferris wheel as it's like rotating. Well, that was happening. The whole thing fucking shut down, and then they had to bring in a rescue squad with like cranes to get people out of there. The thing just like kind of stopped working, and then everyone's stuck.
It froze. Literally.
I mean, Carney rides. There was a kid when I was like in the junior high. I remember he and his older cousin went to like the carnival, and he was in one of those rides that you're like in a cage and it's flipping around and going nuts. And the cage fucking opened, and his for whatever reason, there's also like a car kind of seatbelt that they strap you in, including the bars that clamp you in. Well, the bars were unclamped, and that kid was not in the seatbelt thing, and his friend, who was like some like muscle jock, fucking grabbed him and like saved his life. It was like dangling. Those rides are, I mean, they're fun, but they're a little dangerous.
You know me, I love a wooden roller coaster, and I always love a good carny. What can I say?
Well, what do you think of a forensic serial killer mystery? This Idaho guy that looks like
wow,
look like they got him. What's his name? Brian.
Well, what's amazing? Yeah, what's amazing about him is here he's a student of criminology,
PhD,
posting ridiculous stuff online. And I guess he didn't, he was supposed to be a very good student, but he's not good enough.
Well, they say his peers said, oh, he's a genius and stuff. But the problem was he made some, if it's him, and they think they got
I mean, I don't think it's that. Nobody else is in the running.
Well, first of all, they say with all the DNA technology now,
Yep.
like if you're gonna do that and you're stalking someone, do it outside. Don't do it inside where your evidence is everywhere. But the one thing is, like, it sounds like he was basically an incel that hated women, and he was maybe stalking these sorority chicks, but
I don't even know if he hated women, but the thing is, he thought he could get away with it because he was such a good student of it. But obviously, ridiculous. I mean, come on. The thing is, there's so many better subjects than a bunch of sorority girls. I mean, please.
Well, they say like kind of people with super high IQs, like geniuses, don't make the best detectives. They don't make the best interrogators because there's a level of arrogance that goes along with that, where someone who's kind of like a little less intelligent, but they're really detail oriented and take notes and all that stuff because they don't trust their own brain. This guy was kind of like thinking, oh, everyone else is dumb, I can get away with it. Absolutely. You know what's so insane is the DNA, and this is kind of a side note, creepy thing. The FBI, they got the DNA, how they traced it to him, because I don't think he had a criminal record.
No,
was one of these like ancestry.com things where basically
genealogy tests. Yeah,
this genealogy, they're selling all the. Well, I think the FBI and the CIA demand those records, as they sell it also to big pharma and all that other stuff.
Well, the thing is, he got pulled over twice on the ride home with his dad, but the word hadn't got out yet that they were looking for that car.
Well, you know, it's where guess where he was pulled over twice in the same state, Indiana.
Hello,
Indiana, just like
Indiana wants me. Lord, I can't go back there.
Not wearing your seatbelt or something like that. Yeah.
Or as my brother likes to say, Indiana, where everybody goes to jail. Just love to arrest everybody.
$5,000 fines for speeding. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Simon was on a
most wanted.
Was on a wanted list.
I was on Bloomington's Most Wanted in the 90s.
Yes,
Are you sure that wasn't most unwanted?
Oh, no, I was most wanted. I had to go to the chief of police and beg to get off. I used to have to hide going back to my house to make sure that I wasn't going to go to the pokey.
Yeah, well, you're lucky you didn't have to bed to get out of it. But Simon, one day you're going to be on this podcast because I've heard too many stories that other people need to know about you, the producer. Now, Tim, Tim, recollect for me, how long have we known each other?
So we knew each other. We had hung out before I was officially in the band.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, even say since the band. It doesn't matter. I just give me a figure.
11 years.
What? Really? Well, not long enough for me. But Tim, there's one word I've said to you more often than any other word in the American lexicon. What word is that? And it refers to you, because I only say it to you. And I say it to you almost every time you come over to my house.
You're kind of stumping me here.
Volume.
Now, okay. All right.
The story really reminded me of you. Oh, this is the Earth's quietest place, and nobody can stand more than 45 minutes. Orfield Laboratories, this is a chamber in the US that is 99.99% sound absorbent, and volunteers actually see hallucinations after a short time. So they say silence is golden. It is for me. But there's a room that's so quiet it becomes unbearable, and the longest that anyone has survived is, and it's south of Minneapolis.
Survived? You mean just couldn't take it?
No. 45 minutes. It holds the Guinness World Record for the world's quietest place, but stay there too long and you might start hallucinating. So it achieves its ultra quietness by virtue of a 3.3 foot thick fiberglass acoustic wedges, double walls of insulated steel, and foot thick concrete. And the company's founder and president, Stephen Orfield, said, "We challenge people to sit in the chamber in the dark." One reporter stayed in there for 45 minutes. Now, when it's quiet, your ears will adapt. But the quieter the room, and I know this, the more you hear, and you start hearing your heart beating. Sometimes you can hear your lungs, you hear your stomach.
Is it absorbing the heartbeat? Is it such a sound acoustic?
Well, it's just
sponge
it blocks out. Yes, and so it's very disorientating. And it said how you orient yourself is through sounds you hear, like when you walk. So in this chamber, you don't have any cues. You take away the perceptual cues that allow you to balance and maneuver, and you're in there for half an hour, you better be in a chair. Okay, so this chamber is used by a multitude of manufacturers, which test how loud their products are. So it's used for formal product testing, research into sound of different things, heart valves, the sound of a display on a cell phone, etc. So anyway, they're also helping companies such as washing machine makers to develop metaphors for what sound should sound like. It's kind of interesting. Also, Harley Davidson used the lab to make sure their bikes were quieter. All right, so this is very
I
interesting.
thought they liked their loud sound. I thought that.
Well, I bet they like some loud and some not so
Okay,
loud. So
okay.
anyway, so what's interesting is, I think I've mentioned him before on the show, this Barcelona artist Trez, who conducts silence. That's what, turning things out in the parking lot, turn the lights off in the bathroom, in the hallways. And when it gets completely silent, because you think it's quiet, but it's not quiet until every electrical thing is shut off and you feel like you're suffocating. You actually feel like you're choking. Now, to back this story up, same day I read it, this is horrifying. So, an Iranian man who was tortured with silence for 8 months said in an interview that he was not a normal person after his release. So it's called the White.
No.
Oh yeah, no. So Amir Fakharvar said the White Room prisoner who was tortured, it left him with terrifying horrors. It's called the White Torture, which is often referred to as this White Room that they use as a type of psychological torture to make a person feel isolated from everything. So a prisoner is held in a cell surrounded by white walls, completely muted, leaving them deprived of all their senses.
Yeah.
So not only is the room all white, but the food that is served to the prisoner is also white. So in modern times, the White Room torture was issued by Iran, by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, in a covert detention center. And the prisons that were kept in the center, who were traditionally journalists who questioned the Iranian regime, right? So anyway, this guy said broken bones, beatings, nothing was as bad as the White Room torture. He didn't see any color. All of the cells were white. The floor were white. Clothes were white. Lights were white on 24 hours. Food was white. Couldn't see or hear anything. And then the Iranian Revolutionary Guard made the then medical student slip a white piece of paper under the door to see if he needed to go to the toilet. Oh my God. He was there for 8 months. And after those months, he couldn't even remember his mother and father's face.
Whoa.
He was released from prison. Creepy. He was not a normal person.
Yeah, I don't think he'd come back the same for something like that. I mean, all these tortured. Yeah. Who comes up with these things? I have a new way to torture someone.
Well, you torture me with the sound of your voice sometimes, but I guess that's better than one of these chambers.
You know what? It would torture you the most if I sang this Cream song, "White Room." that would be what I should do. So I was watching Monday Night Football on Monday, and I'm sure you heard about this early in the game. Damar Hamlin, 24-year-old kid who's second string. The star was injured in the beginning of the season. It's his big chance, and he's living his dream. He tackled someone, and it just the impact just hit his chest area, just in that perfect zone. Where you're all the kind of electrical whatever pulsing that requires your heart to
Vargas nerve probably
try to require your heart to beat. It just got caught in that sweet spot, and he stood up like and then collapsed immediately on national television. And then we didn't know if he was dead, and millions of families were watching this guy. Well, he's still in jail. I mean, he had a cardiac arrest right on the field. Usually we're so desensitized. So
who's in jail?
No, sorry. He's still in the hospital. Sorry.
Which is another form of prison.
Because we're so when you watch these sports, someone gets like a broken leg and they just kind of wheel them off and they're on to the next play. But this was like, everyone's like, what the hell? And they had a defibrillator and they're trying to get it going. But
and they're only starting to discuss the horrors of the amount of concussions football players, boxers, extreme sports characters receive, and how much damage that these repeat concussions occur. They're only starting to really delve into that now, and there's so many other forms of physical devastation if you're going to be in a physically devastating sport.
Sure. But it also has brought up the conversation about the NFL union for the players. So like baseball and basketball and hockey, their unions are better. So if you're some kid who gets like a $50 million contract for 10 years, like a signing, and you get injured 2 years into it, like baseball, basketball, they have to pay you that $50 million. Not football. Basically, it's like, I just had this life-changing injury. It's like, well, see, we don't have to pay you. And they talk to all the executives, and they talk to the owners, and they're like, no, we want it this way. We want to give the message like, there's other people to replace you, and we want the desperation, and we want you to go absolutely nuts as much as you can, and just like throw you out like livestock to the next one. It makes better entertainment and makes it much more, because other people, it's like, oh, I've guaranteed $50 million. Why have to try? Like, no, we want to see just maniacs out there destroying each other.
Well,
and, no, but the point is, so if you're a voyeur of this, it's either like you change it, which suddenly there's just no one's going to watch it, or you
nobody's going to change it.
Yeah, you take it for what it is, and you're just like, okay, we just want to watch people destroy each other. You have to be honest.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to give another shout out to Dark Side of the Ring, and just see what really happens with wrestlers from concussions or from steroid abuse or from just, ego boosting and then ego deprivation, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, we can bring this around to musicians. We don't have any freaking insurance. I mean,
Nope.
we put ourselves in the face of, well, I don't know if it's danger, or maybe the audience is in more danger than we are. But however, and we certainly ain't making no 50 million a year.
We're not making 50 million, and touring in a tour bus like icy middle of the winter. I mean, even
you've had your own tragedy in a tour bus.
Well, that's a whole other story. But even like billionaire Gloria Estefan, even her tour bus back in the day went off an icy road in like Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and she broke her back. I mean, it's just like, get back on that thing. Well, I'll lighten the mood a little bit here.
Good idea.
Speaking of icy roads and stuff, Minocqua, Wisconsin. These people, because they had that big winter blast over the holidays, a lot of people kind of decorate their front yards and their houses with Christmas lights to outdo each other and draw attention. Well, this family made a 40-foot snowman. I mean, the thing is just a giant.
I mean, they must have had a ladder.
I don't know how they did it. Actually, it's kind of, you could create an avalanche. I mean, you could. I mean, it's not just like vertical. It's like this giant, like almost pyramid, and that's northern Wisconsin. That's the news of the winter right now. Everyone's going out of their way to see this.
So what happened to the snowman?
Oh, it's still there.
I want to know how they got to the top layer. I mean, that's taller than 5 people put together.
It does. The way they did it, so it's not a traditional like giant snowball on top of a smaller snowball. It looks more like a giant wedding cake with a face at the top. It's got this kind of cylinder cake.
Tim, you're an adventurous. Have you ever gone, or have you ever wanted to go into any of these ice bars? These are ice hotels where everything is just carved ice.
No, I've been in.
You tend toward the islands.
No.
But
I have been in extremely cold, far north situations. But not, those are more kind of like make your own menu rather than go to like a resort that, but I have been to like ice festivals just randomly, like walking and there's like people trying to outdo each other with these insane sculptures of, and it gets pretty, insane. Like the sandcastle championships,
Right.
These things get really, they get
competitive.
Next level.
Yeah. Competitive.
And there are people that are just like really impressive with it. But I mean, I don't go out of my way. I've just kind of like stumbled into these situations.
Stumbled into an ice fest. Well,
Yes.
you're a man of great adventure. Anyway,
the big ice fests. There's a few of them, but I think the biggest one, or the most famous one, is up in Hokkaido, Japan.
Oh, really?
Sapporo.
Okay.
Yeah. That's like one of the most famous ones. And there's some in Canada that are really big.
Well, I hope we don't face an ice fest when we go there in February. Let's just say that.
Well, February is a good time to.
Well, I mean, who knows?
Run into icy temperatures.
We're sitting in January and it's 60 degrees.
Well,
Nobody knows.
We were in Moscow, Russia. We'll probably never be again, but Moscow, Russia in February, and it was one of these freak winters they literally never have. It was like 50 degrees, and usually it's just mountains of snow, but.
Well, anyway, Speaking about mountains of snow, Howard Paar, our next guest, who is notorious for running a club in L.A. in the 80s, bringing a lot of English bands there. He wrote 2 books, and he talks about, the druggery and the deception, and he's going to read something for us. And now he's an Emmy Award-winning and Grammy Award-winning music supervisor. So we're very happy to have him on this, the Lydia and Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl. This is the Lydia and Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and special guest. I don't even know how to describe this guy. He's a writer. He was a club promoter, a DJ from London to Los Angeles. He's written 2 books. He's music supervised over, I stopped counting at 70 movies and various television shows. And he's going to bless us right now with a passage from one of his 2 books. So which book are you reading from now, Howard?
I think I'm going to read from Top Rank in it because I think that's the new one. But anyway, I haven't read for this one before because during pandemic we weren't doing them, so it'll be the first reading of anything. So you have to.
I love popping cherries.
There you go. That seems like a very appropriate way to start things.
Give it to us, Howard. Howard Paar reading from Top Ranking.
Top Ranking. This is the first chapter. 1979. James Dawes sat on the Sunset Strip outside the deco double doors of the rundown, now glorified crash pad Sunset Tower apartment building, on the steps that everyone from Jean Harlow and Paulette Goddard to Frank Sinatra and Ava Gardner had walked up in the joint's illustrious past, wondering what the fuck he'd do next. The record label job he'd landed fresh off the boat from London would mercifully expire at midnight, but broke would follow soon after. We wish the cops who were a byproduct of his time at Rail Records would expire too. On the upside, he had found some really tasty Levi Stay Press trousers yesterday at Poser on Hollywood Boulevard, and some narrow red 1/4-inch braces at the Army and Navy store on Vine to hold them up high above the lace-up black officer's boots he wore these days. He'd been told about a guy who owned a failing club and was looking for someone to rescue things, but he hadn't picked up the phone yet. Despite all this, he was waiting on wild child actor spawn, Drea Dresden, well aware they caused a lot more trouble together than the Paar, but neither of the sometime lovers could resist. 10 minutes later, she banged out through the Sunset Tower's doors, black lace top half off one shoulder, holding a rapier lazily in her left hand. There appeared to be a bit of dried blood on the tip. He looked up at her as she offered a hand to elevate his hungover ass, her black hair draping across him. A club owner had once described her as Stevie Nicks if she had been raised by the Manson family, but he would have said a young Gloria Swanson. Rough night? Not particularly. Leslie and I hung out with these 2 old film writer guys who had good coke. They gave up trying to fuck us about 3 a.m. and weren't too boring with their stories about what this place used to be like, she said in her signature ironic husky voice. Is that blood on the rapier? Yeah, it was from an old Errol Flynn movie one of the guys had written. He had it mounted on his wall. I used it to demonstrate what would happen if he touched my ass again. Does Iggy Pop still live here? He'd heard tales that he used to dive out of the apartment window into the pool way below. Iggy's a fucking mess. Why do you even care? Because he fucking counts, Drea. Raw Power is a crucial record. In London, I'd put stereo speakers either side of my head and play it at full volume to blast a hangover in the next week. Honey, as good as that record is, I've seen him passed out on his face too many times to say he's crucial. He let it go, knowing his London perspective wasn't as up close as hers. Want to get some breakfast? Yeah, I'm starving. Denny's or the Tropicana? Let's go to Schwab's or Greenblatt's, they're nearer. They were walking, which was just as well for the citizens of West Hollywood. James had been limoed around for the last 2 years, and no one, including Drea, thought it wise to give her a driver's license. They ambled down Sunset to Crescent Heights and grabbed a couple of counter spots at Schwab's Pharmacy, a legendary spot that had been open since 1932. The joint had a lovely rep for having catered to actors, including Orson Welles, Judy Garland, the Marx Brothers, and Marilyn Monroe, but also treated underemployed hopefuls with the same deference, which extended to the odd free meal. James had become intrigued by the place as a kid, watching Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard when a broke William Holden heads to headquarters, the place where everyone meets to wait for the gravy train. Drea unhooked her black purse from the bullet belt that crossed from right shoulder to left waist, pulling out a furled newspaper. Here, I got you the new NME from the Cahuenga newsstand yesterday. Fuck, thanks. They ordered from a waitress who probably dated from when a broke Ava Gardner worked there while waiting for her big break. James the pork chop and eggs, Drea the eggs Benedict. He opened the English music newspaper so they could both look through. Look, the only ones that come to do multiple nights at the whiskey. The food came quickly as always, and seeing him fully engrossed in dipping a crispy bite of pork chop into egg yolk, she turned the page. Hey, look at these guys. They're dressed exactly like you are today, except you don't have a pork pie hat. The Specials' debut single, Gangsters, is coming out on their own two-tone label, read the caption below the band picture. Fuck, I need to hear that quick. Let's go. Tower might have it, but if not, I bet Aaron's on Melrose will. An hour later, after striking out, going through Tower's fairly well-stocked racks of import 7-inch vinyl, the mission was accomplished at Aaron's Records. He got a shiver of anticipation looking at the stunning black and white label logo and instinctively loved the idea of putting a different band, the Selector, on the flip side. They hustled over to Drea's place on Kilcare and dropped it on her battered turntable. The instant pure adrenaline rush was indescribable, and 2 minutes and 48 seconds later, he knew he'd just heard the future. It was about to be 1980, and this is what he wanted it to sound like.
Thank you. Howard Paar reading from Top Ranking. So, Howard, let's start at the beginning. You were in London when punk exploded, but you decided quickly to get out of there and go to Los Angeles.
Well,
what the hell?
Well, exactly, right. Truth is, like Freddie Laker's, I don't know if you remember Freddie Laker Airways, right? But they had a £200 round trip ticket to LA, but you had to book 6 months in advance. So I bought this ticket towards the end of 76, right? Come spring 77, I'm like, fuck, you know, but the ticket was there and it was time to go. So that's what happened. Yeah, it was, anyway, that's exactly how it happened.
A ticket, a near to expired ticket forced you to go to Los Angeles.
Well, no, it was like you had to book the ticket. Like, it was so cheap compared, like no one like me could have afforded to go to LA before. You know, the flights were really expensive. So Freddie Laker was this indie guy who started this cut price airline. You had to fly, you did your customs in Niagara. And when you land in LA, it was actually great because it was almost like getting out of an old film. The plane landed on you'd already done customs, right? So it just pulled up onto this outdoor tarmac. You walk down the steps out into like a bacon parking lot, basically. So that was the story, and it was
How long did you stay?
Exactly.
How long did the flight take?
No. How long did you stay? You went to LA?
I never left.
You never left. Okay.
I never left.
Wow. Not even to go. Well, all the green card stuff, and
I went back Christmas 79, I think. So 3 years later.
And you were able to get back in the country.
Yeah, I got was another story that we'll we don't have to go through today, but yeah, I got sorted here through an idea I had. Anyway, I got a green card by then.
So then how did you go from DJ club guy into the actual business itself?
Well, but first let's go into the DJ club guy, because because Howard brought a lot of things to LA, including myself, but a lot of English bands came to the O.N Klub, which was, how long was that happening for, Howard?
About 4 years.
And and that was in Silver Lake when it was a rough and tumble area.
Yeah, it's that's it. I mean, look, the funny thing with this book, it's sort of layered with fiction and fact, so it's kind of a melange of stuff. But the truth was, I did get really inspired when I heard that Special single in 79 and wanted to do something different. Like, I love the whiskey, you know, and the Roxy. I mean, it was so many great bands. And that was the flip side of being in LA during that time in London, was that all the bands came here and you could go see them, you know, at the whiskey, as opposed to probably bigger places by that point. So it all worked out pretty well. But the thing is, you'd go to the whiskey, right? There'd be some fucking hippie DJ playing like the Doobie Brothers. You know, before you go on, or you know what I mean? And it just was like, this is fucking killing my buzz completely. And when the specials thing happened, I just got the idea of doing a place where you'd have one band a night and just play records that suited what you were up to that night around it. And that's how what happened.
Yeah, so important to do that. To have good music surrounding a band that you bring in there or that you like, as opposed to the freaking other side of the LA Laurel Canyon scene.
Yeah, yeah. It also has the advantage, especially with sort of a sort of nascent ska thing, and with soul. I want to do old soul stuff. So we did people like Gino Washington and Marsha Hunt, and just that kind of thing. So people started to trust the place, that if we booked someone new they'd never heard of who was in that sound, they'd come anyway. So that was where the payoff was.
Well, and also working with Sugarhill Records, which was very unique at the time for that crossover, to bring rap shows into an alternative club.
Yeah, it was it was great, and I mean, it was funny actually, when I was getting, my last publisher wanted to do a coffee table book on the O.N Klub, which in the end, there was a woman who was very dedicated to researching, looking for art, and she found various things. But the bands, she got some really nice notes from some of the New York bands saying they didn't think anywhere like that was in LA at the time, and it felt more like home to them, which was a huge compliment to me.
Well, it's great. But initially, it was kind of the more post-punk ska thing that really was your that was your stamp, and then but you would spin off from there. So when you brought like the English beat, they were called the Beat, right? But then they had to change it to the English beat because there was another band called the Beat. It was like some lawsuit or something, or
exactly. And look, the O.N Klub was tiny, even though we doubled it. I mean, you had enough people in there that it was almost the same as the Whiskey, except the legal capacity was about 125, I think. So it was tricky with bands, a lot of the bands, but people would come down there, the English Beat, and some Mick Jones from The Clash came up there, played the Palladium, stuff like that happened there,
Yeah. And then, so you're kind of owning that scene. And then, of course, I guess early rap was coming in. So you're basically rubbing elbows with a lot of people, and that was your stepping stone into actually the business, or you're a publicist before you were working for the actual record industry, right?
Well, this was really the first real tangible thing I did, and so yeah, it was look, it was I loved doing it, while I was doing it, and it felt time to do something else,
Well, I loved that you were the publicist for, because Mick Ronson, especially Slaughter on 10th Avenue, is one of my favorite albums. And people that don't know, I mean, Mick Ronson was a great producer, but played on the best Bowie albums as well. I felt Bowie stole a lot from Slaughter on 10th Avenue myself, but also N.W.A, Eric Burdon. Was that when he was with War?
No, this was later. After
Okay.
I worked for this. It was actually kind of fascinating time. I got a job. Well, I had done PR right out of school when I was 16 in London, so I had a little bit of a background in it. And I got a job working for a really old school guy, Norman Winter, and we were like funny. I've never talked about this one before, so it's good you brought it up. Like, it was the polar opposite of me in every way. He was a complete, hustler, rogue, old school to the core. And so we had these different people would come to him, and there was a label. Actually, he knew a lot of mob related people, which was, in the music business. So it kind of was where I got a lot of my insight into that I use in the stories, and some way or another, Eric Burdon came my way, and it wasn't through me. Like Ian Hunter and Mick Ronson happened because I knew people at Epic and at Polygram, which was how they came to me. But Eric and some other vintage artists came directly from Norman, and he put me in a room with them. We got on, and it all worked out. But it was later on. This was like later in the 80s. Eric was on his own. He'd just done the biography book. I've got my I used to be an animal, but I'm not now. So he was great. I mean, he told me stories. I mean, look, Eric was a really good guy, but he lost all his publishing. His manager at some point had said if he signed that over, he'd get Eric the money to make a Jimi Hendrix movie.
What? No sense.
Bizarre.
Yeah, so it was a tough one because he's a really good guy. But I love working with Eric.
So, as a publicist, would you say it's easier or harder to work with a controversial band like N.W.A? How do you approach it as a publicist? I mean, people were trying to censor them, and people were not. Parents weren't so happy about it. So,
easy.
What's that?
That was easy. It's harder with someone like Eric in a way to kind of bring, a sort of relevance for someone,
who'd been in the business for so long. Yeah.
Yeah. So things like N.W.A was easy,
They wrote their own story basically, and people wanted it. So I mean, what about Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis? I mean, they're known as producers for the most part, more than artists. So when you work with a producer as a publicist, are you pushing Janet Jackson or whatever they were producing at the time?
That was the era. I mean, I think really it was just to sort of, people hadn't really, publicized producers before.
Right.
But because they had, first of all, they were incredibly eloquent, smart guys who were doing a lot of really exciting stuff. And, I worked with Morris Day as well during that time. And it was fun, it was fun for me. I mean, it wasn't, it wasn't like I had a lot of perspective on a lot of that stuff. But, they were just really good people.
And they're phenomenally talented too. I mean, they're
Morris was great. He was such a character, and we had some good times.
And as a publicist, what do you actually do? Do you write the press releases, set up the interviews? What was the parameter of your job description then?
That's basically it, right? I mean, I think sometimes it's trying to articulate a point of view and a position for someone that perhaps it's always struggling to get the space, but I like journalists, we always hit it off. I mean, even at the club days, the only people who got comped in the O.N Klub were journalists, basically. And, I enjoyed all that time with them.
And it was also, the periodicals of the time could make or break an artist. And that, of course, is a completely different game now. I don't even know how a publicist even approaches the digital world.
I think I'll tell you one thing. What I realized, and I ended up going to, I'd been doing Michelle Shocked as well, and Hunter Ronson that we talked about, and I did that because of Mick Ronson. They were like, Ian Hunter, I'm like, great, nice to meet you.
I hear you.
But Polygram, I went in-house at Polygram, and what I gradually realized was, like, in England, publicity press could still break a band quick. In America, it didn't really happen that way. I mean, you could get someone a ton of press, but if they weren't on the radio, they weren't selling records here, and that was incredibly frustrating to me.
And now and payola was a big thing also back in the day. So at least according to the book I read,
it absolutely was, and I will say, a lot of the people I met at the time, on some levels, like a lot of the people in that world were, exactly what you imagine them to be, and not people who we'd hang out with per se. But writing about them was a lot more fun, It's like,
and that period too, especially the British press. I mean, there was Melody Maker, NME, there were Sounds. Some people that we've had on the show, like Kathy Unsworth, who came out of rock journalism and then went into, fictionalized true crime novels. She's been on the show. Chris Bond, who wrote for that and now is the head editor of The Wire. We'll have him on the show soon.
I've got to check her out. I don't know about her. I didn't listen. I've listened to some of the shows, but I hadn't listened to that one.
Kathy Unsworth's great crime writer, but she bases it on real crimes that happened in the UK and then slightly fictionalizes. But she came out of Sounds magazine. That's how I met her. But British press at that point, or John Peel, was so important to bands.
True, it's true. I mean,
there was nothing like that here. I mean, Spin magazine, please.
Yeah, exactly. And on top of it, I think England's such a small country relatively. You know, you could go there. I mean, you know this better than I do. You can go there and be up and down the country in a few weeks, and it's tangible and real. Whereas here, you know, English bands will come for 6 weeks, and you know,
Yeah, good
I mean,
luck.
you can handle it. You know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So then you go from publicist to actually working for Polygram.
Yeah, I went. They Sue Sawyer, who was a dear friend of mine who was at Polygram, she had hired me in to do Hunter Ronson and Michelle Shocked and other bands, and she was leaving to go to Burdon. So I went in and met with them, and you know we all got on, and I went over there. So that was that. Yeah.
So what would you? I mean, you weren't an A&R guy. What were you doing exactly?
What happened was I started off doing publicity, media, and artist relations, as they would call it, and you know, it was actually in a way. Well, I mean, the good thing was working with some of the bands over the years. You know, as a sort of translator, I suppose, with what they were putting up with at the label, or what they were dealing with at the label. But during the course of that time, I started A&Ring some bands, and then some of the English bands as well. I would be like a US rep. And so I started trying to find other ways for them to get exposure. And that's sort of what led me into music supervision, because I would start pitching songs to independent filmmakers. And, you know, before licensing was much of a thing, but it just seemed like a natural fit. It was an exciting time. You know, it was obviously like Pulp Fiction and Trainspotting and that kind of film that was suddenly showing you could have great music in a film that wasn't maybe.
Well, and working on the Big Lebowski and also Greg Araki, I mean, Nowhere. I mean, these are very diverse types of films. And like I said, you've done over 70 or 80 film music supervision soundtracks. So that's got to be interesting. How would it, you know, how do you adapt to going from the Big Lebowski to Nowhere, or, you know, any of the other, or Bully, which I loved, of course, the film Bully.
Thanks. Yeah. What happened with me was the woman who was doing soundtracks there quit to go live in another state. And so in that moment, I talked to Ed Eckstein, who was president of Mercury at the time. And, you know, I took him to see this is actually, I dropped this, I have talked about this before, because I don't think any record company president before or after, I took him to see Doom Generation, which I imagine you know.
Yeah.
It was like
harsh.
Yeah. I need $200,000 to do Greg Araki's next film. It's going to be great. And he gave me the chance to do it. So that was where it started. And I had the best time with, I mean, Greg, I love Greg's films, and it was just incredible learning experience, how to make those deals. You know, we paid, and I still do this a lot, we pay everyone the same money, you know, even if it's not a lot, at least it's fair and everyone's getting the same money, and we got great artists involved.
Well, and what's interesting is even back in, from the clubs, from the DJing to the publicity, I mean, your range of who you were working with was extremely diverse. So your knowledge, encyclopedic knowledge of music, is what makes you such a valuable player in doing these soundtracks.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, look, my taste was, you know, and is diverse. So, and I was lucky that some of that got reflected in a lot of the artists I work with. And I think there is all the elements, you know, I think anyone who music supervises, you know, I use everything I've ever learned, from DJing to band management, you know, whatever else, all these elements come into play all the time. And so it's perfect for me. And what happened really was, what I realized, if you're a label, there is a sort of, you know, there's an onus or a pressure, whatever way you want to put it, to use the artist from your label on whatever soundtracks you're doing. And I realized I couldn't shove a band that didn't fit onto a filmmaker. But
then again, Polygram had a huge range of artists. I mean, it's not like you're running out of representation of genres.
true enough. I think, like, we won't get into specifics, but I basically, there were some good bands there. There was also a lot of like rock bands that had been around a long time, and were still
shitty after all those years. Shitty after all those years. It happens.
They were still selling records, so that's
it happens.
Look, my attitude seriously was like, if I'm gonna get paid twice a month by a record company, I'll work whatever I've got to work. You know what I mean? That was the choice you made. If you're independent, you can choose what you want to do, and if you work for a company, they pay you twice a month. You don't have to worry about the rest of it. So I had the best time there, but I realized, pretty quickly with film that I just was so in love with the process, and I wanted it to be pure, and I wanted to get on the other side of it. So I went to see Brian Lautz, the creative artist I met when I was working with INXS, if I remember correctly. And I went to him and I go, listen, I want to get into music supervision. Would you think about being my agent? And he said, are you fucking crazy?
Why did he say that?
Well, money, you know what I mean? Like going into that world. And I was like, yeah. So I was lucky because I had Greg's next film to do, Splendor. And I had met Larry Clark, and he was doing Another Day in Paradise at the time. And it was going to be all vintage soul, which is like, so I was like, okay. So I had those films to start with. You know what I mean?
No, it's great.
I mean, so grounding.
Let me ask you though, as this music supervisor, I mean, how often doesn't the director come to you like, I want this, or are sometimes the directors just kind of like indecisive, and you help that? I mean,
it's never, there's not one way or the other. It's always a range of things. I think, look, my attitude to every film has always been like, if I get the script, I understand what that director's vision is, and I'll help them execute it. That's the fundamental of it. And sometimes you get to pick every song. Sometimes it's a mixture, and sometimes they have a vision that you already share, and you help them go get the deals done.
So now with all the conglomerations, these mega media companies, how often do executives from the top come like, you're going to push this, and they start telling you?
Well, I'm not. That's why I don't deal with that, because I'm on my own. So no one's going to tell me what to do. The only person I care about ultimately is the filmmaker. And don't get me wrong, like on a studio film, there's a lot of diplomacy and there's a lot of layers, and there's some great music people at the studios. I think I realized that, when I started into this thing, there were a lot of people at film companies really love music more purely than anyone at a record company.
You're right. I always said that, Howard. I always said that if you want to make money in music, start by hating music, and then you'll have a lot more options. If you actually love music, that's kind of hard to make money if you actually care about it.
And the scary thing is, a lot of people, I think, took your advice.
Well, lately I'm into musical sociopaths. I mean, Frank Farian. I mean, they're just so insane. Like, it's so cynical, but it's kind of funny in a weird way, even though it's brutal.
That's why I like writing about it fictionally, because it is funny. I mean, the whole thing is so corrupt and funny in a certain level. It's just if you're living it on a certain level, like inside a company that's acting that way, then it's less fun, and you don't feel, I feel right about it at a certain point,
Howard, were you around LA or very familiar with, I know you were there then, I believe, with the Eddie Nash incident and all of that, which Boogie Nights and Wonderland came out of, the John Holmes involved, controversy of cocaine and murder?
No, interestingly, I tell you one thing, and I'm not like, certainly wasn't then all California, but I will say, I don't know about you, every time I went into the Starwood, I just got the weirdest
creeps.
I remember, stuff would always be bad there. But I had no idea why. And I actually, when they did the film, I actually was talking.
Which one? Boogie Nights or Wonderland?
Wonderland.
Great film.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. I actually met with them about Wonderland and was talking to the filmmakers at the time. And yeah, I like the way it came out too a lot. You know, we talked about music a little bit and what have you. So that it all made sense to me, but in the moment I didn't know about it.
Do you know that Chuck Negron, who's been in the worst band in the world, Three Dog Night, who was in rehab about 18 or 20 times, was supposed to be at that crime scene that night, and was the one night he tried to go clean, but his wife, I think, found the bodies of Chuck Negron. Yeah. It's a really interesting case. But anyway, I mean, LA at that time, and still, I mean, I think LA is one of the most terrifying, certain parts of it, terrifying places in America because of both the randomness of violence, Santa Monica Boulevard being like the boulevard of broken dreams, the serial killers, and all of this. It can be a very terrifying place. And
I'm live to the serial killer stuff too. It's like the Hillside Strangler.
Well, and by the way, you know that Kenneth Bianchi did a series of child murders in my hometown of girls when I was 11.
Well, also speaking of serial killers, you did the music, or you were the advisor for Monster, which is about
Eileen Wuornos.
Yes,
that was an amazing experience. I mean, Jesus, I remember, like, first of all, I loved that whole experience. It was a great experience with Patty Jenkins and Charlize Theron. I remember, like, the first time we went to see that film, like late, like Patty had a cut, you know. I think it was like, but I swear it was almost like 3 hours long early on, you know, and saw it at night in a cutting room, and it was like I was riveted. Like, there wasn't a split second when Charlize Theron, for me, was not present, like there, you know.
Right.
It was amazing. Like,
it's an incredible performance. In the scene where she's starting to fall, the two girls are falling in love with each other, and they're at the roller rink, and that Journey power ballad comes on. Was that predetermined by the director, or did he had a handful of kind of 80s corporate power ballads, and they're going to see which one you could license? And how does that work?
Patty, the directors of Patty's a woman, just to be clear. She and Charlize actually had heard that song while they were there, and it turned out to be really complex because there were a lot of issues with Journey.
Yep.
With one another.
Yep.
And
well, Steve Perry and Neil Schon are always suing each other.
Yeah. And
I'd like to sue them both for making so much bad music.
Well, this was the funny thing actually with Steve Perry, because they would have been on my list of bands I was slagging off completely. But I will say, like, we ended up showing the film to Steve, and one of the things I really liked about him, I remember, was that, you know, you have these perceptions of people. And I always, truthfully, I really fucking hate it when people you can't stand turn out to be really good guys.
Oh yeah, it's always funny. Yeah,
that's just the worst. But no, he actually copped to the fact that he took an awful lot from Stevie Marriott, that, you know, who I did love, and, you know, just a really good bloke. And he ended up helping us get the song, the same lousy money we didn't have for everything else. It took a while, but we got there. And he really came on board to help with the film. It was interesting, you know.
That is interesting. Well, you know, Neil Schon they recorded those things with the Filipino Steve Perry sound alike, and then sold it again. You know, got a deal with like Walmart to kind of write Steve Perry out of collecting royalties, which, you know, Sharon Osbourne did that with Ozzy, but that's a classic kind of sleazy move.
Yeah, it was dirty. I mean, I never met Neil Schon, but I just feel like all of that was just very dirty, and I do feel bad for Steve Perry, truthfully. I think he's a good guy, and that was brutal.
Supposedly Purple Rain, the song, was modeled off of what is that song called? I'm Forever Yours, or I don't know what it's called. The song, the Journey song that they use, whatever it's called. But
Don't Stop Believing.
No, it's not Don't Stop Believing. It was.
I don't know any of the others.
It was the the one about like being on the road and like starting a family or some shit like that. Doesn't really matter. But anyhow, that's
look, but hang on. I have to just say that the saddest ripoff that we've encountered on this podcast with now 180 or more episodes is the fact that Dennis Dunaway, who wrote so many of the best Alice Cooper songs, that they were ripped off of all their royalties as well. I mean, it was just, to me, heartbreaking. It was just ridiculous.
It's so, I mean, I can't even begin to
18 schools out, all of them were Dennis Dunaway, and they as usual. I mean, this is the history of music, though, is, you know, the managers rip you off for the publishing. This is where I'm different than all the other assholes out there. Forget about it. But it was just so crushing to me to hear that.
I think, you know, I started getting my biggest insight into this sort of was triggered by Morris Levy, who I do use in the new book. Like I was researching some pilot that I don't think ever happened. I don't remember that, but I was researching a pilot. Anyway, I'm looking up publishing rights. I'm like, you know, you're seeing this name like Morris Levy. I don't see, you know what I mean? It was like he hadn't written any. You know, who was he? And it's once you start digging in,
he's a lawyer.
No, he was Morris Levy. Had a label called Roulette. He started out with a club called Birdland in New York, and
of course,
total mobbed up guy. And I've heard so many great stories about him. I mean, all the way through to John Lennon, you know, and like I mean, he's just one of the larger than life characters who was so much fun on some level, except when you start looking at what they did to people was just, you know, when you start looking at a human level of what.
Music mob.
Absolutely. I mean, when you were one of the biggest bands you represented, for better or for worse, was which is Def Leppard, and Mutt Lange. He's got like 5 of the biggest selling records as a producer between AC/DC and Shania Twain and all that stuff. When that album came, the not Pyromania, the one afterwards, when that came out, they had to buy Jim Steinman out of it or something like that. But in other words, it was what I'm getting at was a too big to fail. They had to sell like 6 million units in order to pay back whatever it costs. So, I mean, producers, did you ever run into that too, or producers would position themselves in a too big to fail, that basically the album's going to succeed because the record company wants their money back. They have to push it on society.
You know, I think, look, there's a lot of bands in that era that I work with that, you know, I would say all kinds of stuff for. But Def Leppard, to me, are like, actually, they were so original in their own way. I love those guys. I mean, they're the most truest band as a band I can think of that I met.
Whoa, okay.
Oh my God.
Look, going back to the Mick Ronson of it all, like the first record they ever rehearsed to was Suffragette City. And their love of glam and that side of it, and just being not changed. Do you know what I mean? When we worked together, they didn't want limos. They didn't want any, you know, there was very, very down to earth people and really good friends still, like band as gang, you know what I mean? And they look, I mean, thinking about Rick Allen, for instance.
Yeah, lost his arm.
He wouldn't have been in most bands after that, right? So,
right.
But the production side of it and the money side of it, honestly don't know, because those records were getting made and I had nothing to do with the making of their records.
Right. Are you a sucker for Sheffield bands? I mean, there's so many bands come out of Sheffield. I'm like, what's going on up there?
Yeah, I not really.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous question. So when you were working with Larry Clark, Ken Park, was that ever even released in the United States? I mean, that's a pretty controversial movie. You have a teenager ejaculating in it. There's all types of
all of Larry Clark. I mean, from his original photographs. I mean, Tulsa, one of my favorite books. Just, you know, really a depiction. I mean, bully and just a real kids, just a total depiction of really a side of America that just really fucking exists in the worst aspect of what youth can be. and horror they are and the horror they go through.
Yeah, Ken Park was extreme, that's for sure. I think look, I've seen posters pop up for it. I think it got put out in Russia or somewhere. I think that's how most people.
I have a copy. Someone gave me a copy of it in Europe.
Yeah.
I saw it once.
It was floating around.
Yeah. You could find it if you wanted it. I mean, look, every experience with Larry was genius. I mean, he is just the best. And, you know, from the very early days of Another Day in Paradise, and I don't know, we've done maybe 4 films, I think, together. And he's just the guy, you know, he's just.
And I mean, you know, that was then, and obviously cancel now if he ever reared his head with anything as controversial as any of the aforementioned films. Impossible to do it now. Impossible.
Yeah, he was fierce about getting Final Cut too, which like no one gets, you know, and so he was making his own films in a way that there was very few films ever got seen that were making films in that manner. So yeah, he's a fierce one.
So were you still working with INXS when Michael Hutchinson died?
Yeah.
And I heard it was a bike accident. Someone told me he got into a bad bike accident. And he had a concussion. And sometimes when you have head trauma, it leads to potential suicidal thoughts. That's what I heard. I don't know if that's true, but
you know, look, honestly, anything would be speculative. And what was I will say this, and what he went through with the British tabloid media was horrifying.
Why were they picking on him so much?
Well, that's the British press. They love you, then they hate you.
Yeah,
I mean, that was the nature of British press.
Yeah, he had, when most of the time, early days when I knew Michael, he was in great spirits. We had some amazing adventures together, and a brilliant last of the rock stars in a way, right? And but he ended up, after Helena Christensen and the relationship with
Bob Geldof's ex-wife.
I think
was that
really
fair?
Press went after him.
Paula Yates,
fucking Saint Bob Geldof, you know. I mean, vile.
Oh,
I put a lot of their doorstep, you know, and he was just getting out. He was planning to come to LA. He really wanted to work on films, you know, doing music for films, and we had a lot of stuff in mind. I've still to this day, I can't get my head around the fact that he suddenly went like that. It made no sense to me.
Yes, someone told me, a friend of mine who is friends with one of his good friends. Someone told me he basically, it wasn't in his character, and he was in London. He rode his bike around. Didn't have a helmet, and he hit his head really hard, and he had a head trauma. And then a week later, he killed himself.
Oh, well, and you know what? There's a lot more information coming out now about not only football players, but of course wrestlers. Dark Side of the Ring, I may promote, about the trauma of head trauma and how it does. It can really twist you up. And of course,
I always say when O.J. Simpson dies and they cut him open, they're going to see how many concussions that guy has had when playing football. And
Herschel Walker.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's the epitome of brain damage. Hello. So Howard, what's next? What's the latest thing that you've worked on that you really, you know, sunk your teeth into, that you're like, that was it. That was fun.
Eileen which is going to premiere at Sundance, is a film by a guy, William Oldroyd, who did his first film was called Lady Macbeth, which is not a Shakespeare novel. It was a really good, I think you'd like it actually. It's if you go find it, you can find it online. It's an adaptation of Ottessa Mossveg's novel, which is set in 1964. Very noir relationship between two women that when I read the script, it felt like a lost Patricia Highsmith novel to me. I loved it so much, and we got into the music is really happy with it, excited about the film.
Fantastic.
Starting in on Murray Heller's new film Night Bitch with Amy Adams, which is, I think it's going to be a good one. Another book adaptation.
I've heard about the synopsis of this. It's very strange. Can we reveal what the synopsis is just briefly?
Oh, absolutely.
About a woman who believes she's turning into a dog.
Yeah, it's there's a woman who's given up her artistic career in New York to raise her son, and her husband is on the good enough guy, but always on the road for business, and she starts to see signs that she's turning into a dog.
Not a bitch, but a dog.
Listen, I am so excited about it. I love, first of all Murray's films have been great. If you've never seen Diary of a Teenage Girl, you've got to go see that.
Which you also did the music for.
Yeah. But I've always wanted to work on a dog movie, and I finally realized why I'd had to wait all this time that this is
no Cujo remakes or anything like that.
Well, bow wow wow yippee yippee yo.
No. This is definitely I don't want to say more than that. I think the setup's enough.
God.
Well, we have Cocaine Bear coming out. Maybe we can have Amphetamine Dog.
I like the sound of that. Maybe that's actually a good book title.
I'll work on it. Anyway, this is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and music supervisor for television and film, award-winning novelist, ex-DJ, club promoter, in and out of everybody's rock and roll existence. And I thank you for being on the show, Howard.
Nice meeting you, Howard. Yes.
Brilliant to be here. Thanks so much.